I'm very pleased to introduce Professor John Bateson. I had the pleasure of hearing John's presentation at the Frontiers in Services conference in Singapore last month, and I thought it was particularly relevant to the AMB 251 topic of social isolation by the aged, but more broadly, this will have appeal to anyone who's doing any kind of research with aging consumers. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John just to introduce yourself and then to take us on the journey.
Good, thank you, Rebecca. Let me just, by way of background, talk about how I got into this whole area of researching this particular topic, because I think it's very logical when you come to follow it. I was in a very nice restaurant in London. The waiter gave me the menu. I couldn't read it. I put my glasses on and I still couldn't read it. So I picked up my smartphone, for those of you who have them, and I turned on the flashlight. And I was reading my menu and I looked up and everybody else in the room was doing the same thing. And I looked around and realized that about half the room had their mobile phones out and their flashlights on. I was kind of wondering what it was all about and was laughing about it. My colleague said to me, I was having dinner with, "What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, I was explaining the flashlight story." And then they said, "Well, what are you guys doing?" And I said, "Oh, well, we're busy sending Morse code to each other." And they said, "Well, what's the message?" And the message was, as a manager watching all this, why don't you just turn the lights on? And I guess that was the beginning of my whole view about the aging population and the whole concept of healthy aging. And if we talk about a simple example, which is the one I just gave you, and talk about the human eye, it's probably the best way of motivating this story of healthy aging. Light enters the eye through the pupil in the middle, that little black hole. The pupil is controlled by the iris on either side, which is two sets of muscles. The light goes through the pupil, hits the lens on the other side, and then gets focused on the retina at the back of the eye. Biology in high school. The problem is aging. As you age, the muscles in your iris get tired. They're logical. And the muscle that opens the iris gets more tired quicker, which basically means that when we get old, we can't flex our eyes as much, we can't flex the pupils as much. In fact, to the extent that if you're 30 years old, you can actually, in a darkened room, you can get your pupils to be 7 millimeters wide. If you're 70 years old, you can't get to 5 millimeters. What that does is dramatically restrict the amount of light that goes into your eye. It also means you cannot as easily change the amount of light that's entering your eye. The second problem is that when the light hits the lens, that wonderful piece of technology, there isn't as much light gets through. Why? Because the lens is organic. The lens grows every year on year on year, and it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. So when we're a child, it's about 3 millimeters thick, but by the time we are my age, it's about 70 millimeters thick. And the net effect of that is that if we're sitting in a restaurant with the same kind of background light, a 30-year-old gets roughly twice as much light onto their retina. And that means that basically an older person can't cope in the darker light, which is why everybody turns on their flashlights. That lens, by the way, also gets stiffer as it gets older, and we all know the symptom of that, which is we can no longer flex our eyes, flex the muscles to make sure that we can focus on close and far away, which means we all need glasses. Why is that important if you're a researcher? Well, we know that bright and dark affects us in a service setting. And Biswas in 2017 is from the University of Florida, did an experiment which was basically looking at the effect of the light on what people do in restaurants. He took a couple of medium-sized restaurants, and he adjusted the background level of light in the restaurant between 25, which is pretty low, to about 250, which is what most offices are set at. And then he looked at what people ordered. And what he found was in the dark, people ordered a lot more calories. In fact, in the light, they ordered 40% less. And actually, they ordered much more food that was bad for them in the dark. And the question obviously has to be, is that why I'm putting on weight? Probably not. But the answer is, that is the storyline of what research has shown us about Brighton Light. Why is all this relevant? Because we have two models of what happens in a service business. We have a service business which says it's a multi-sensory experience. We're in the middle of an experience. We use all our senses to take in what we're seeing, what we're getting. We actually put that together, and that's how we receive our service. So therefore, if we can't see as well, we are literally losing out on part of the experience. The second model we have of the servicescape is co-creation, as it's called, but it's effectively, the best analogy to me is the theatrical script model. It says the whole concept of a service experience is as a script. I'm part of it, the other service providers are part of it, the other customers are part of it. We all follow the script, we all do what we're supposed to do, and because we do what we're supposed to do, we get a good service, and the system works well. Go back to my ordering of food in the restaurant. Because I can see the menu, I can order efficiently. The waiter doesn't have to stand around doing nothing. I get my food ordered quickly. He gets the food on the table quickly, and it all works well. If I can't see the menu and I'm busy actually worrying about what to have because I can't see it, then obviously everything goes wrong. So there's a concept which I call healthy aging, which is there's nothing wrong with my eyes. Doctors will tell you that I am literally, my eyes are pretty good. I can't see in the dark. I can't see when light levels drop. And there's a concept that says that is affecting the way that I have my experiences in the service business. And the last piece of the puzzle, of course, is this whole concept of the world getting older. And I don't think I need to spend much time on that with this group. But it's just, I wanted to just flag up the fact that this is happening much, much faster than people ever even dreamed that was possible. These are population pyramids, which is the name that the demographers use, even though they don't look like pyramids, for Germany and France. And what you can see from here is very clearly that in both countries now, the number of people over 65 is bigger than the number of people under 15. It's actually, in Germany, it's nearly 22% of people are over 65. And the people under 15 is only 13%. And this is the first time in human history this has happened. This is not something that's just a temporary phenomenon. This is a one-way, irreversible journey. We can briefly look at why that's happening. That is Germany in 1900. And that's why it was called a pyramid in the first place. And at that point, we ended up with 5% of the people over 65 and 37% under 15. Huge difference in the pyramid. The pyramid changes over time as we go through. What is happening is very clearly child mortality is going down left to right. 1900 child mortality in Germany, that's children under the age of 5 dying, 30%. That's nearly 1 in 3 children died before their 5th birthday. And by the time you get to 2000, it's less than 0.5%. Fertility, the number of babies born to each female, has gone from 4.5 on the left-hand side to 1.5 on the right-hand side. For those of you who are demographers know that 1.5 is not enough to replace the population. And the German population has been going up, but it's now starting to decline. And the last thing that's happening is longevity. People are living longer, and as you can see, the scale on the right-hand side has gone up. I've had to extend it because there are more people living to greater ages. And in fact, Germany crossed over the point at which people over 65 was more than the people under 15 before 2000. This longevity effect isn't just in Germany and France and Australia. It's actually all over the world. There's a wonderful story about in one of the economic historians' books about Kenya. And the story was that in 2000, the life expectancy of the average Kenyan male was 65. So if you were 40, you had 40 years of life left ahead, 25 years of life left ahead of you. And off you go in 2003 and you start enjoying your life. In 2013, 10 years later, you might expect that your life expectancy has gone down from 25 years to 15. In reality, it's remained the same. Life expectancy in Kenya in 2013 was 75, not 65. In other words, life expectancy was growing at exactly the same rate as time was passing. And so that life expectancy all over the world is going up and up and up. The way I look at it is that this little table, I call them crossover tables, but effectively, this is the point at which the over 65s start to dominate the under 15s. It's the takeover of the greys, if you will. If you look before the turn of the century, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Japan, which of course is a very famous example, have all passed that point. In the next decade, most of Europe goes, and in the 2010 to 2020, the UK, France, all of the major European countries have gone. In Asia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore have gone. Canada has already changed over. But in the decade that comes ahead, you've got a huge transition about to happen. Look at some of these countries: Russia, the United States, China, Australia. They're all going to be changing over to become older, grayer societies. It is a real rising tide of grey. The good news is that the people who are over 65 don't behave. All of the data suggests that people who are over 65 behave much younger. When you ask them how old you feel, they say, I'm 10 to 13 years younger than I am than my actual chronological age. It doesn't matter whether you talk about data from Vietnam or whether you talk about data from the United States or for Europe. It's somewhere between 10 and 15 years people say they feel younger. And we consume according to how we feel. So everybody still wants to go out, they want to eat in restaurants, they want to go on holiday, they want to go on cruise ships, which is probably why cruise ships are growing so fast. And a number of studies, including the McKinsey study, that basically say this is a huge market. I mean, in 1950, there were about 129 million people on the planet that were over 65, and by 2075, it will be 2 billion people. And these billion people will actually have a lot of spending power. It's even more pronounced than that if you go from 1950 to today, which, let's be honest, is one lifetime. The number of people over 65 has gone up by a factor of 4. So that's just the story. There's a healthy aging problem. There's a healthy aging phenomena, which means that every part of our bodies is aging. We're not sick, but we're changing. There's a piece that says that's having an impact on the service experience, on the service scape, whichever language you want to use. And there's a piece that says actually the world population is moving very, very fast across the spectrum. Huge problems for economics and business of that transition. We're focusing on the impact of service businesses. Let's just return to the human eye. This is the story that I had, a slightly less attractive picture. We've effectively got the pupil, we've got the lens, and we've got the retina at the back. Lots of other things happening. That gel in the middle of the eye starts to break down as you get older, which means as you get older, you become much more sensitive to glare. So if you're out at night and it's raining, you get very sensitive to glare. You get much more sensitive to candles on tables in restaurants, because that's a very point spot of light which tends to reflect around inside your eye. We're losing rods in the backs of our eyes, so our peripheral vision is changing. What does that mean if you want to talk about what's happening to this co-production and the service experience? Well, we all know we actually can't focus on near objects, so therefore we need reading glasses. When we're 40 years old, about half the population needs reading glasses. By the time we get to 65, it's 95%. One of my favorite stories is the fact that 95% of people need glasses, but when you climb in the shower, there are 3 little bottles with tiny, tiny, tiny writing on them. Nobody goes in the shower with their glasses on, and you can't tell which is the shampoo, which is the body conditioner, what body lotion, and which is the conditioner. If you're not careful, you end up putting it on your hands and doing this desperately, trying to find out which bottle is which. You need a lot more light to be able to see sharply. People who are older need more light, background light. They need their screens brighter. They're a lot less able to adapt to changes in light levels. If you take me into a cinema, we go from the bar outside into the cinema, it takes me much longer to acclimatize to the changes in the light levels. Obviously, in low light levels, it's quite difficult to see. I need a lot more contrast. I need sharper lines on the edges of letters. I need scripts on my screen which are very clear. I don't want fancy screens. I need steps labeled with yellow strips so that I don't fall down the steps because I miss the edges. I'm also losing my peripheral vision. I'm losing about 3 degrees in that total span that I can see after the age of about 40 for every decade. I lose about 3 degrees a decade. So it's narrowing down the whole time. My color vision goes, because my lens is turning yellow, I get more trouble distinguishing violets, blues, and greens. I hate menus which are gray with blue type on them. Makes it even more the contrast is low and it's the blue and the green. As I say, I'm more sensitive to actually point spots of light. Worth pointing out that all of this happens, and it starts to happen at 40, not 65. Because I think it's people get the idea that there's some magic point in time when you draw a line and then you're old. The answer is we all know it happens gradually. I want to pick just up on that color vision and go back to this topic about what happens when you're doing research in this kind of area. This is a study that was done in Germany, a lovely study. It was done in a winery on the Rhine. Customers came in to buy wine. They were tasting the wine in a tasting room, and a couple of academics got into it. What they wanted to do was to understand whether the background light in the room, color of the background light, would affect the taste of the wine. What they did is first of all, they served identical wine at the same temperature, but they put it in black glasses. Why? Because you don't want to be able to have the background light affecting what you perceive as the color of the wine. And then they changed the background light in the room. What they actually had was a screen, and behind the screen with fluorescent lights of different colors, and they did white, blue, and red, and green. And what they did is they then surveyed people. Did you like the wine? Was the wine very good? Did you like the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the last question they asked was, how much are you prepared to pay for the bottle of wine? Now, the fascinating thing was that the color of the background light affected how much people thought they would pay for the wine. And they said they would pay about €6 a bottle if it was in blue light, compared to €4 a bottle. Great study, lovely piece of science, lots of complementary studies that went with it. The interesting thing is that when it was done in the winery, they didn't keep track of how old people were. So the question then becomes, for me as a researcher, does this still work if actually we've got an older sample? It also raises questions for those of you who are doing research, which is that if by in 3 years' time, roughly, the number of people over 65 in Germany would be greater than the number of people over 25, how can we justify using student samples? The vast majority of the student samples are under 25. So it's actually going to be an interesting way of changing it. This is probably the most famous piece of research that was ever done in Servicescape. It was one of the early ones. For those of you who don't recognize it, this is Milliman's study. What Milliman did, he took about 1,400 customers in a set of restaurants in the Midwest, and he adjusted the tempo of the background music. So all he did was he had roughly the same style of music, but in one case it was 70 beats per minute, which is something equivalent to walking slowly, and in the second case he had fast music, which was about 92 beats per minute. So it's kind of an upbeat type model. And what he measured was how long did it take to get served, how long were the customers sat at the table, how many customers didn't bother waiting for their table because that was not a booking system, people had to wait for a table, the amount of food they purchased, the amount of bars, drinks that they purchased, and the gross margin. And of course, what you can see is that actually, with the faster music, what really changes is that people leave the table quicker. If it's slow music, they stay at the table for about 56 minutes. If it's fast music, they leave at 45 minutes. And actually, the rest of the things stay the same. The food purchases stay the same. The big difference is they buy an extra drink. And that extra drink makes a big difference to the profitability of the restaurant. But there's nothing in here about aging. Our ears age just like every other sense that we have. We lose about 2.5 decibels for every decade up to the age of 55. Doesn't sound like very much, but this is a log scale. 10 decibels is the difference between somebody in your living room playing a piano quietly and a dog barking. So we are losing sensitivity quite fast to the music. The other thing that's going on is as we age, we lose high frequency notes. Lose high frequency notes quite at a fast rate. If you are a Samsung user like I am, you can actually hear this effect demonstrated for you. These are amazing gizmos. If you actually go into the advanced sound settings on a Samsung, I've never tried it with an iPad, and you look at sound quality, and then there's a button called Adapt. What it tells you is you can set your music listening frequencies up for either under 30, 30 to 60, or greater than 60, because they know that the frequencies change. But the most interesting one is called Personalize. Personalize, it tells you to put your headphones in, put them on, and push the button in a quiet room, and basically it gives you a hearing test. It plays tones, beep, boop, beep, beep, different frequencies in different ears, and it builds up a picture of your sensitivity to frequencies. And then it goes in for each ear, and it adjusts the sound level by frequency to get you back to being 30 years old. The really vicious thing that it does is it allows you to toggle between the two. It allows you to actually listen to what you were really listening to before versus what you've been listening to. Many more new sound systems are doing that as well. So your ears will be changing, and nobody knows with a Milliman study if you repeat it with an older population whether it works as well. What we do know is the opposite of sound, which is noise, is that noise actually really upsets us. And noise actually destroys the quality of the flavor of food. Everybody goes to noisy restaurants and says this is terrible. Wood in Oxford actually went out and tested it. She basically had two sets of noise, one at 50 decibels, which is quite high, and the other one at 70. And between 50 and 70 is the difference between having a conversation in your living room and somebody with a vacuum cleaner. And effectively, when you change the noise background level, that really annoying stuff, sweet things taste less sweet, salty things taste less salty, crunchy things taste less crunchy. You literally are having the music level in the background, which we all complain about, affecting the flavor that we can taste. And the last thing that happens with our ears is that we can become less and less able to pick out an individual in a group to listen to them. So it's a binaural capability that we have. They call it the cocktail party effect, which effectively you can sit and you can listen to one person in a room, and your brain is capable of screening out the rest. We start to lose that ability as we get older. I think it's because of the changes in our ears. And effectively, what happens is that we then can't hear the waiter or waitress when they're asking. Let's talk about the brain. If the brain changes, well, the brain shrinks as we get older. And that's a physical phenomena which everybody has actually measured. The interesting thing is the brain doesn't shrink. The brain doesn't shrink across the whole area. The brain shrinks predominantly in the front of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of our brain that relates to abstract thinking. When we're after the age of about 60, our hippocampal starts to shrink, and that's the control center of our memories in our brain. What the changes in the frontal cortex do is it slows down processing speed. It's effectively like having an old smartphone where the clock speed is slower than the new generation, and it reduces working memory. Nobody knows whether the two are linked, but effectively the working memory is like the cache on our brain, where the brain brings stuff in, processes it, and then sends it back out again. And the capacity of that shrinks. So our brain is changing. It starts to change, by the way, at the age of about 20, so don't worry about it. It's too late for most of us already. What does that mean in terms of that reduction in the working memory and slower processing speed in terms of the way the consumers make decisions? If you've got a reduced working memory, there's more chance that information is brought in, is kept there for too long, it decays and it becomes inaccurate. And there's been all kinds of studies showing that our ability to remember short-term things in our working memory goes down as we get older. The capacity to make big, complicated decisions declines. The best way I always have of thinking about a big deliberative decision is the old multi-attribute choice model, where you have brands across the top, you have attributes down the side, you have a weighting by attribute, and then your brain is supposed to do some kind of mathematical computation. Our capacity to make those decisions goes down. Our ability to make them doesn't go down, but we have less capacity to be able to make those decisions. The other thing that happens predominantly because of the working memory is that we have real troubles having selective attention, focusing on this while this is going on, or dividing attention, which is doing this and this simultaneously. Literally, as you get older, you're a lot less able. Question is, how do we adapt to that? Lots of things, lots of research that's been done predominantly in neuroscience, but also quite a lot in medical science. And people are worried about the ability of older people to make big medical decisions well. So one thing we do is, if we can't make big, complicated decisions, and we haven't got the capacity to make lots of them, we ration it. We ration it based on what's important to us. There's been studies which varied how important a decision is, and then watch how people make decisions. The second thing we do is we truncate the whole process. What we do is we say, okay, we've got all these brands, we've got all these attributes, I can't cope with all that. So what do I do? Reduce the number of brands. So I reduce the evoked set that I choose from. I reduce the number of attributes I look at. Effectively, I become more loyal. And the big study is Lambert and Pandro, who looked at purchasing of cars in France. And what they found is the older you get, the less your choice set. You go back to a single brand of car, you go back to a single model of car, you go back to a single dealer. You just can't be bothered to make that decision, which is quite important. And the last thing you do is you make many, many more decisions actually automatically. You use your expertise and the scripts you already have, and you just make a decision. You're just not bothered to go into some complicated process of actually making the decision. What happens to our memory? Our memory fades, but it fades in different ways. Some things remain completely unchanged. So our semantic memory is the memory of all the information that we collect as we go along through life. It's, if you like, it's a filing system that's organized by category. And interestingly enough, the older we get, the more we have in our semantic memory. It explains why other people tend to be regarded as experts in certain kinds of areas. Our procedural memory doesn't change either. So we can still ride a bike, we can still remember scripts for how to do things. We have it all set up in our head, and it's completely automatic. But other things decline. The most important one is what's called the episodic memory. And the episodic memory is about, I was at this point in this time, at this time. I remember. I remember I was talking to Rebecca and she told me this. And that is about us placing ourselves through time with memories attached to it. The other one that goes, and you've all met older people like me, that says the things I've got to do in the future, my prospective memory, my to-do list fades. And older people tend to keep lists, because the answer is prospective memory starts to fade for whatever reason. We cannot hold those things. And what also fades is our ability to create new procedural memories. In fact, learn new scripts if we're going into a new and very different service business. So if we're launching some kind of new internet service for older people, it's going to take older people longer to remember what to learn the script of how to do something. What does that mean? What it means is that the loss of episodic memory means you forget where information comes from. You forget who told you something. Therefore, the chances of you being able to rank information based on credibility is lower. Why older people tend to be more susceptible to fake news, because they can't remember who told them something. They remember what it said, but they can't remember who it was. Clearly, you forget where you park the car, and go for these new wonderful buttons where the lights go on. You forget which locker you use at the gym. Research in the medical field says telling a patient, an older patient, take the pills in 2 hours is not going to work. Taking the pills when the alarm goes off probably will. As I say, new skills. I don't know how many of you remember Monty Python and the Flying Circus, and particularly the song called "The Life of Brian," the movie called "The Life of Brian."
Yes.
Life of Brian. Oh, yeah,
yep.
you do. Okay.
Yep.
Well, at the end of that movie is a whole bunch of people being crucified, singing a song called "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life," and that's the theme song for the healthy aged. It turns out that as you get older, you look on the bright side of life. Why do we know that? Research by people like Carter and Stern basically show older people 3 sets of photographs. Pleasant pictures, neutral pictures, unpleasant pictures, and then they do a selective memory. What can you remember? Older people compared to younger people overweight the happy pictures all the time. Research that shows even though we actually have a fixed capacity making complicated decisions, older people will consciously go and avoid unpleasant experiences. If it looks like something is going to be unpleasant, they'll go somewhere else, which means it's quite difficult to get them to try new services unless they're really motivated to do so. The other thing other research that was done in the medical field is older people, when you ask them, "You were ill last year, how was it?" they will understate dramatically how that was. They will reinterpret history in order to be able to be more. Big piece of research done on the American Customer Satisfaction Index, which shows that satisfaction and age are related. What the American Customer Satisfaction Index is, it's run by the University of Michigan. They're trying to survey to find out how satisfied American consumers are with all the things that they do. And so basically, at any one point in time, they'll do about 90,000 respondents a year. They'll survey satisfaction with about 200 companies, and the 200 companies are surrogates for the sectors that they're in. So you've got a huge amount of data. Their aggregate looks like this. This is the national score for the American Customer Satisfaction Index. So this is across all sectors by quarter, and it shows the trends in terms of customer satisfaction. Clearly, in the third quarter of 2015, customer satisfaction dropped. If you look at that data, you can cut it the other way, which of course is what the researchers did. And this is some work that was done by some other researchers at the University of Michigan. And what they do is that they cut by age. So they've got the demographics for all these people. And what they're saying is, are older people more satisfied? Now, this is 1 year, 2008, across all sectors. And effectively, it shows a 90% correlation between customer satisfaction score and age. They've done the same thing within sectors, across all age groups. They've standardized for income, background, gender. They've done it every way, and you still end up with about a 90% satisfaction index. So it really is about the fact that as you get older, you get more satisfied. Question is, why? And potentially, it's the work on socio-emotional selectivity theory. A very big word for a concept which is, to my mind, is called life is too short. What that says is that at some point in your life, you realize that you're not immortal and that you're going to die. And at that point, you start to change the way you are motivated to maximize enjoyment. You choose experiences that you're going to enjoy. You avoid experiences that you are not going to enjoy. Now, if you're choosing experiences you're not going to enjoy, if you're restricting yourself to restaurants that you already know, chances are that your satisfaction is going to go up. And just because you're doing things that are great fun and that you want to do, and you know how to make yourself happy by doing that. If you think about the fact that we are in a service experience, we are following a script, we have a production role. And then if we do our role correctly, we will maximize our own service experience, but we'll maximize the service experience of other people. And the question is, what happens when the brain ages? So we know that you are less able to multitask. What that means is if I'm having a conversation at the table and the service provider comes up and says, "What would you like to eat?" I'm now required to multitask. The chances are I'm actually going to not do that as well. If it's a complicated decision, then what will happen is on a menu, it'll take me longer to make my decision. I'm putting me under pressure to do that by having the waiter standing there tapping their toes or the waitress clicking in their fingers doesn't help. In fact, it makes it worse because putting people under time pressure as they get older, the decisions slow down even more. We're going to ration any complex decision. And there's a lot of research that says if you're going to ask somebody to do something complicated, a finance agreement, or in the medical sphere, decide whether to have a major operation, you need to pick your moments. It tends to be in the morning. It tends to be the research has shown, based on your biorhythm. It also tends, if you have a cup of coffee, it helps you to make complex decisions. Proven. But the answer is those complex decisions are going to be rationed, and we have to choose the point at which we get people to make them. Back to my noisy restaurant, which I think we all hate, but I hate them even more. The answer is the higher the noise level, the higher the music level, the more I have trouble making decisions. You literally cannot hear yourself think. Interesting expression, but it actually works. And for those of you who are interested in the fact that when service businesses always go wrong, something always happens, and the service literature has come up with this idea of recovery. Service recovery captures somebody when they have already had a bad experience and put it right. In some cases, you get very high levels of satisfaction. The problem for an older person is, can you actually make the idea of complaining to a pleasant experience? If complaining is going to be a bad experience, and people perceive it to be a bad experience, they won't complain. They will just walk. They'll just move and leave. A little tagline on the end is a presentation in its own right, which is, if you have very, very fewer people under 15 or under 20, where are you going to find your service personnel? You're going to find your service personnel at the other end of their lives when they get older, where they are still active, they want part-time work, they want to enjoy themselves, they want to go out, and they want to have a work social life, so therefore they will be serving us. But all of the things I've just said about people actually slowing down, not being able to multitask, making complex decisions, applies just as much to the service provider as it does to the customer. If you look at things like this, if you look at what's happening to our sense of taste, smell, hearing, sight, in our body, the fact that there's a study which was published actually in the Australian, which it was called The Longest Walk to the Gate. It was a study about how far is it from check-in to the gate, and which airport in the world had got the longest distance. It turned out, I think, to be Shanghai or Beijing. It was 3.1 kilometers. So you're 70 years old, you check in, you've got a carry-on bag of 10 kilos, and you have to walk 3.1 kilometers to the gate. Very often they'll stop you from having a trolley. And when you get on the plane, you then have to take the 10-kilo bag and lift it above your head. The question is, at what point does your body say this is not right? So these kind of things, these changes are all happening. The question is, as a service business, how do I deal with that? What can I do in order to be able to deal with those different types of customers? Now, there's two ways you can do it. You can segment the customers and you can build a restaurant for older people. The problem with that is that older people don't want to eat in restaurants that are labeled for older people. We already know they are 10 years, they feel themselves to be 10 years younger, and they're definitely not going to want to do that. So if you're going to do a restaurant for older people, you're going to have to do it in a very subtle kind of way. The alternative is you've got to adapt the whole of what you do to be able to cope with different age groups, different levels of healthy aging. And one of the consulting companies calls it age neutrality. And age neutrality is about actually designing something that works just as well for different age groups. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about manual dexterity, the ability to push the buttons on the elevators, or not. Rebecca and I think, I don't know whether Rebecca was in the same hotel as me. We were in a hotel in Singapore. You climb into the elevators, the buttons are all there, and they're brass on brass. The numbers are brass, the background is brass. When you push the button, it lights up blue. But if you don't push the button, they are brass on brass. Literally, you could not see the numbers on the elevator unless you had glasses. That's the issue of neutrality. This company basically does age neutrality surveys, and I just pulled out this data from a single hotel website that they commented on. And it's worth just putting this into the context of trying to create a age neutral service operation. So you've got a website that's got very many competing offers on the front of the website, which is a normal trend. But the problem is, as you get older, that becomes distracting, and it makes the pages very complex. And if you're trying to process that, it's quite difficult to do if you're older. Lots of clutter, lots of hot links, lots of evidence that say that older people have trouble double clicking. Lots of people have trouble with hand-eye coordination, getting the mouse exactly over the right place. So you've got to make sure that the hot links are not too close together, otherwise you click over the wrong one. The way this particular site works is there were pictures, and if you hovered over them, it would bring those pictures to life. Same issue, hand-eye coordination. No magnification built into the website, therefore much more difficult for people with older eyes to do it. And then the last piece was they had lots of specific deals, room rates, all on separate pages, all requiring different amounts of skills in order to be able to do them. They also went on to talk about the hotel itself, the fact that when you got into the bedroom, you couldn't work the light switches because the light switches were too complicated. And there were no bedside lights, which if you're an older person, you need bright light in bed to be able to read, etc., etc. But really, that's what I wanted to talk about. I was effectively trying to make a point which says healthy aging happens. It happens. We all are changing. We're all changing over time. All of our senses are changing. And our brains are changing. That must change the way we experience the service business. It also changes the way that we can participate in our service business. And that from a researcher point of view, that's a hugely important topic because the world is getting older very, very fast. From a managerial point of view, you go back to my opening example, which is if everybody in the restaurant has got a flashlight on to be able to read the menus, surely the manager should notice this and should do something about it. And I think that I'm writing this up as a book. I'm writing the last chapter of the manual, which is what happens in the future. And the answer is, of course, the competition between service firms will mean that they will chase this older market. Because the competition is so intense, the world in which we live will change. Restaurants will probably become brighter, and they will become less noisy. Most of the things that will change, actually, younger people couldn't care less about. The menus are easier to read, and the types have a better typeface. So really, that's the gist of the story. Happy to take questions, Rebecca, and over to you.